Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Jamie Thompson, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Jamie has written a hell of a book. Jamie, this book is so good. I realized yesterday that we were talking today, and I thought, oh, crap, I really wanted to read this book. It's important to me. And so I bought it on Audible. By the way, everybody, get the book on Audible or on Amazon, wherever you want. I'll put the link up in a minute here. It's an event from almost 5 years ago now, and it's just so relevant to this day. Like we're in the same moment of time. The book is called Standoff. Let me hold this up for the audience watching. Standoff, and it's about the Dallas attack on the police officers. It killed 5 officers and wounded a bunch of people. It broke out during a peaceful protest about the police and all of our violent stuff that's going on in the U.S. So again, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for writing this book. Let's talk about it.
Great.
Why this book? Why this story?
You know, I covered the shooting as it happened when I was writing for the Washington Post as a freelancer. So I was down there pretty much the day after it happened for a couple weeks and just continued to stay interested in it. I think it's one of those stories that puts a lot of people in the same room together who have different thoughts and opinions about what happened that day. And the book goes into the stories of one of the protesters and an emergency room, a trauma surgeon. And it really goes into great detail about the Dallas SWAT team. And I think when you put them all together, it just offers sort of a richness of perspective that I think is often, you know, these conversations that we're having are hard about race and policing. Yeah. So just to get everybody sort of talking.
The book does that. You do a great job of balancing the story. When you look at it and you read the head, you know, the opening of it and the blurb and everything, you want it to go in a direction that you just don't let it go. As the author, you spend a lot of time illustrating this multi-perspective 360 view, including the assailant and the people interacting with him. I mean, it was a really comprehensive examination of this without really any hint of political lean.
Thank you for saying that. That was the attempt. So I'm glad to hear that you think that that's needed.
I'm sure other people are mad at you for some reason on every side, but I, as someone who tries to do something similar, but I appreciate that. That's not easy to do. What had to go onto the cutting room floor to make that happen? That's not an easy thing.
There were some very painful cuts just to keep the story moving forward. I think it's really an ensemble cast of a lot of people. There were a lot of SWAT officers who didn't make it into the book that did some really remarkable things that night. And so, yeah, I had to sort of pick carefully who the reader would really get to know, because if you put too many people in there, it just becomes overwhelming. So, yeah, I'd say some stories definitely got left on the cutting room floor. The character that really interested me earliest was the negotiator, Larry Gordon, just because he's a crisis negotiator on the SWAT team, and he's one of the few Black officers on the team, and he's really spent his professional career sort of straddling these two worlds of cop and Black man, and I thought he really brought a lot of nuance to the conversation. What did you think?
No, I totally agree, because his job, he's a SWAT guy, and as a spy, right? I very much identified with this guy because it's not about military victory with him. It's about, and I always say this, it's affect over effect. And if I can reliably create an affect within my cone of desire, I may not get the one I pick because affect doesn't work like that, then you can go somewhere where there's an alternate outcome. It still may be a military outcome, but your job as a negotiator is to connect on a human level, to get, I mean, affect is, you know, a desired response from stimuli. That emotional response, that spoke to me, because if I'm doing my job, I'm not taking the direct approach in like, where are the bombs? I'm also trying to get in front of time. And so that, like, if there are bombs, how do I find them? You don't find them by running around going, where are the bombs? Where are the bombs? You know, it never works. You have to be something different. And here is this, definitely identify with the whole SWAT team mentality, because I've worked with ODAs, special forces and SEALs and all these different, you know, elements, and they're alphas. And
Yeah.
it is testosterone, and everything's a competition unless you can get in. And I'll shut up here in a second. And unless you know how to get in an alternate path, you'll always be. And you had a character in there. I know this guy, the guy who's always like, I'm going to challenge you. You know, here's how I handle that as a spy. When I go to a new team, if I'm ever able to get with them in a social setting, I try to get people laid. That's literally what I would do, because then they're like, wait, Pete's not a threat. Pete's actually helpful. And then they would leave me the hell alone because I was always serving the team in a way that, and obviously this is all with appropriate things. No one's trying to do anything crazy. But if I focused on them and serving them, it enabled me to break into that team in a way that didn't require a bunch of ABC 1, 2, 3 kind of steps.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the a little bit of the feedback I've heard on the book is I think you're talking about the character, SWAT guy, Jerry Wante.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've had people ask me, like, what is up with these guys? And like, I think what I came to understand as I was hanging out with them and reporting on them is that in a way the SWAT team becomes its own sort of training exercise. Surviving the personalities on the team is an exercise in stress management because really what they're trying to learn how to do is to be able to perform while their heart rate is up and while their adrenaline's pumping.
When you look at those things, those elements, and the to be a badass SWAT person, someone that has the power of life and death over somebody who's very dangerous, to maintain tactical proficiency across any number. I mean, you're talking bank robberies to kidnap rescues, like everything. There's so many different variables. These guys have to be good at what they do. They have to compete to make sure that the other one, everybody knows that they're up to the task, and you damn well better be as well. But at some point, you have to have someone like Gordon who does something else, because, as no matter how badass you can be, if you need someone to be the mouthpiece on that. What are some of the other things you learned about SWAT when you were kind of telling the story?
One of the things that interested me quite a bit is just this history of crisis negotiations in law enforcement. And when you really look at that, one of law enforcement's go-to has always and will always be probably force, sheer force. But you start to see in the 70s, 80s, law enforcement confronts these series of really disastrous episodes where they went in guns blazing and a lot of people died. And it really prompted them to start searching for new techniques. And so you get the FBI and the NYPD launching their own crisis negotiating teams. One of the pioneers was an NYPD detective who had a doctorate in psychology, and he and others start bringing into the field these tools that we would normally associate with therapists: empathy, active listening. And they're not things you think cops are training in, but there's a very robust discipline where they are really practicing these things, and they have proven to be quite effective in a lot of scenarios. Just this idea of law enforcement often has a get it done mentality, and negotiators really approach things differently. They want to slow things down, let people's emotions calm down. So I think that's an interesting sort of subset of what's happening in American policing.
When I was talking with the family about the book, we were talking about the escalation and the militarization of police forces. And it's easy to shake your fist at the police and say, ooh, but we had Sid Hale on, who's an LA County sheriff for decades and just masterful in his knowledge of policing. And he's like, you have to understand that to get federal funding for certain things, you have to have an MRAP. You have to have this much this and this much that. And a lot of the stuff they provide to us is tactical gear, but it's goggles and gloves. You have to meet these standards to be able to be funded. And in LA County, there's no more complex policing district in the nation. And the other thing is I think it was 91 when that North Hollywood bank robbery happened. And it completely, I was describing yesterday, see if I can get it to fit on the camera. Policing used to be like this, like pistol, stop, halt, with like old, like 70s style, 60s era, techniques. And these guys were shooting fully automatic assault rifles with doubled up body plate armor. And everybody went, oh my God, this is a totally different thing. So there had to be an escalation, and you had to have the right kind of armament, not just a pistol, not just maybe a guy somewhere had a shotgun, but like actual tactical gear to deal with a situation exactly like this one.
Yeah, and I think we've heard a lot about demilitarization of police in recent years, and I mean I think we've all seen the stories about the small town somewhere that has the tank
Yeah.
and grenade launcher that likely just has no need for that. But you get into a city like Dallas, which actually is dealing with serious crime, and these officers can sort of take you through a litany of calls they've handled over the years that they've really been outgunned and underprepared for. And so it's hard for them to grasp the demilitarization argument when they see they need these things to do their job safely, they believe. So, yeah, it's a complicated question.
Yeah, and you don't want them to be militarized, but you also don't want them to be sitting ducks. You don't want them with 38 detective specials shooting back at someone who can shoot them accurately at 100 plus yards, and
Yeah.
it's also remarkable to me as we've examined the police and that nature of this is how little training there is and how infrequently an officer fires their weapon in any kind of a tactical situation. I mean, SWAT guys, different story. Their job is to sort of train and work at a higher level, but officer friendly likely shoots their pistol 2 times a year, maybe less than 200 bullets for the entire year.
Mhm. Yeah, I was listening to one of your earlier podcasts where you guys were talking about, a lot of police are trained at the range shooting paper targets, which is not how the world works outside the shooting range. And just being able to perform in chaos and is a different thing altogether.
You spent a lot of time talking about a lot of the different names on the side of the black folks that have been killed by police for whatever reason, and you don't justify, you just say, like, "These are the names. These are the wounds that the community feels." And when you see something like Philo and everybody else, along the way, you're just like, "Why did that have to go this way?" Do you have any thoughts on is there a way to get in front of this problem that you can see? I mean, you've been through this entire mess and you've had to look at the bigger picture. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting. I was just having a conversation with one of the SWAT guys yesterday, and we were talking about the moment in the hallway where this is Baines, who ends up engaging in a firefight with the gunman. And he's talking about after they've literally been trying to kill each other, they start talking, and the guy's kind of funny, and that Baines actually thinks this guy might be somebody he could, in other circumstances, have a beer with. And like he feels some, I don't want to overstate this because obviously he thinks this guy was evil and, killed his friends. But he was sort of grateful for the humor because it really helped him get through the moment. So I just keep going back to this idea that, these conversations that we're having are so polarized. You're
Mm.
either for the cops or against them. And I really think our conversations often reduce complexity on this issue. Cops are heroes or villains. And I think that, leaning into the complexity a bit would really help us. I just actually spent 4 days in Louisville writing about the protests that are happening there in the wake of the Breonna Taylor announcement that they would not be charging the officers. And I spent about 4 days sort of embedded with the protesters and would go through the city walking with them at night. And their main view of the police is as these mostly men, I mean, there are some women too, but they're lined up. They're carrying these 3 foot, riot batons. They've got their helmets and shields on. And I don't think they have any other choice. I mean, 2 of the officers got shot, last
Yeah.
week. So they have to protect themselves. But once you get in the tribe of the protest movement, that becomes you become locked into a certain narrative. And I found myself, as I was getting to know some of them, thinking they would really get along with some of, not all, but some of the cops that I have gotten to know. And I just think we're so divided that we've quit making personal relationships throughout this.
It always strikes me as interesting with when you look at all of the names, and again, you write them, you talk about them in the book, but we don't know the other names. Like this really becomes a black and white issue, but we have a lot of other people. And we like to say on the show, you don't see wealthy people being shot by the cops.
Mhm.
It's a class-based problem. Is that an element you spent time with these folks? I mean, does that, there was I can't remember the kid's name, but there was a kid in Stockton who, just young and dumb and hadn't done anything really wrong, but
Mhm.
gets into a police altercation. And by altercation, he was never within 25 feet of the cops and he ends up getting shot and killed. When he's on the ground, already been shot, they're still shooting him more rounds into him. And it's horrifying to see. But nobody ever says that guy's name. I can't remember his name right now. I just know it happened in like 2016, 17 timeframe. I don't even know what year it happened.
Yeah, I don't remember that case in detail. I do think you're right, though. I think that a lot of this has to do with race, obviously, but I do think there's some class issues. And I think, it's funny. My husband has a very old Honda that he drives, and it is like, you know, not a cute car.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have conversations that we would not drive that car if we were black because we would feel unsafe. We've never been hassled in it as white people. But I do think that you have to think about all these little ways that your life, all these calculations you have to make based on your skin color.
When these events happen, these cataclysmic multi-agency type things, I mean, there's so much going on. It's all recorded now. There's bystander
Mhm,
video, there's passive video, there's all the
mhm.
radio stuff is recorded, there's personal officer cameras, hell, the assailant on occasion now videos this stuff. How much of that did you have access to, and how on earth did you process all this stuff? Because you're describing something that even when you read it, you like, oh my God, as a tactical guy, I'm like, this is so chaotic. You don't know where this person is. I mean, did cops shoot cops on accident? I mean, it's so bonkers how crazy this is.
Yeah, there was some speculation about friendly fire. I don't believe any of that has been borne out by evidence. The police department has not released a ton of information. They finally released some documents outlining things from the night, but it was a very heavily videoed event. I mean, you had tons of officer worn body camera, you had a lot of patrol cars that were recording, you had a ton of people on the streets with cell phones. So I did watch quite a bit of video, and it was surprising how much has been recorded. There was a lot of conversations that happened between the negotiator and the gunman. The negotiator pulled out his cell phone and recorded some of that conversations. You can really hear them as they're going back and forth, their voices, their laughter, their when the gunman gets angry and starts yelling. It is astonishing how much everything is videoed now.
Is it hard to watch?
I have been a reporter for 20 plus years, so I've seen a lot of stuff. And I found some of these videos, one in particular, I don't consider myself as someone who has like a weak stomach, but I almost threw up watching it. Like it was very graphic. And I think, a lot of our violence, a lot of our perception of violence in this country is sort of Hollywood well lit violence. But when you really see, it looks both ordinary and horrifying when you see the actual thing happening, what actually happens to human bodies when you have assault rifles like this in play. So yeah, I mean, I think I was depressed for weeks after watching it. Just the idea that this happened and so many people witnessed it. I was watching some of this stuff months later in a very comfortable space, and I'm thinking these cops saw this happen as they're getting shot at, on the street. I think there's just a lot of trauma from this day that lingers still that I don't know people have fully processed or gotten really enough help for probably.
Yeah, it's that depression and seeing the end of someone's life and these impossible moments. And yet I would imagine that for the most part, even within a square mile of that, everything's relatively calm, maybe chaotic a little bit, but it's such a spiky kind of environment where right here in this little segment of this entire massive, metroplex area, it's horrible, but literally a block away, nothing.
Yeah. There's this very intense period of activity happening on the street, and then the city falls quiet, and it's essentially chaotic in this community college, but everybody else outside is sort of getting up and, trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah, I still gotta buy my dinner. I still gotta whatever. Yeah.
Mhm.
Did you get a chance to talk with, the assailant's family at all?
I did not. I reached out to them multiple times in multiple ways and never could get them to speak with me.
Are they trying to just put it past him, do you think, or what do you make of that?
They gave one interview in the days following the shooting. I really haven't seen them talking since. I imagine it's been pretty devastating for them to move forward knowing they will forever be known as, the family of this man who took 5 innocent lives that night. And, so I imagine that they probably are, I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing from them, but yeah, no luck there.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine they're happy just to stay as anonymous as they're able. What about the families of the fallen and the other thing is we often talk in terms of body count, like, oh, 5 people were killed, and we go, oh, God, it's terrible. Meanwhile, people 6 to 12 that get injured, or however many there are forever changed. Even if they recover, they still have been shot. But a lot of times, it's like, oh, a colostomy bag the rest of my life, or I have all of these other ailments and disabilities. How have
Mhm.
they all fared? How have the families fared?
So I think that it varies. I think that some of the widows had very small children, and some of them had high school age children. I think they struggle every day with dad not being there for. It's a daily, I think, serious ache for them in their lives. I think a lot of people too are struggling with lingering injuries. Shatamia Taylor, the protester who was shot in the street that night, she has a metal plate in her leg with 12 screws. And she sort of rushed her recovery trying to get back to work and earn a paycheck for her family and sort of set herself back some there. So I think that, there's really a lot of damage left that kept cascading for months in the aftermath.
Yeah, these kind of things just, and you're right. Like, you dismiss people who weren't killed, but there they are. She's walking it's in the book. She's walking around on that leg early, and because she's got to eat. You gotta get back to work. You don't, and you also want to be resilient. You're like, I'm tougher than this. I can go do this. I have to do this, and the damage, it stays. I did a whole series of shows. Actually, the second season is about to come out, but called the Prison Chronicles, and I interviewed a bunch of people that have had life sentences and have gotten out, and they've rehabilitated. And one of them is named Shaka Senghor, and he's talking about how every male member of their family has been shot. Some of them are dead. Some of them are paralyzed forever. And we were talking about the damage that they take in the community, and he said that prison was an extension of their community. And I'm like, that's not what any of us want. That can't be the case. And then he says something really powerful. He's like, we look at the actions of these men and we judge them, but in reality, how can they not have PTSD? How can they have hope when you're going to? And all of these guys said, you're either going to get shot and get killed, or you're going to go to prison. These are the
Wow.
outcomes. And so when the police come up and validate that, I don't know how we get out of this box that we're in. And that's just the Black community side of it. I don't know what we do about that.
Yeah, what have you been thinking about that? I mean, you've got a long history in the military. What have you been thinking about the whole debate that's been happening?
It's challenging, and you can say things and then they get taken in a way you don't expect them to get taken. But here's what I would say. From my time in conflict zones, people wanted security and stability. And there's three different things in Afghanistan that they wanted. The man needed to be able to leave the house and go to work and come back safely. That's one kind of security. Two, to do that, he needed to know that his homestead would be safe while he was gone. Otherwise, he couldn't go to work. And then three, if those two things were satisfied, then he could put his kids towards school. And as long as he could do those three things safely, they could try to crawl their way out of whatever existence they had. Without that, there was no convincing them to be anything other than combative. And when I think about that part of it, it does. And the other thing I learned also, and this is, and you've done interviews, a zillion interviews, the perception, the specter, I call it, of danger is always greater than the reality, because there's nothing to reduce it, the specter. It just stacks and stacks and stacks. So all these names stack up and you're like, see? But when you ask the hard academic questions, it doesn't hold up. So there's a gap there. I don't know how to deflate those things, but I know that if you put race in, if you take a negative position towards any of the groups, it becomes more combative. It becomes more intolerant, and it doesn't lend itself to reckoning. So is there a problem? Yes, there's a problem. It breaks my heart that we have a community of people that feel so distanced, so marginalized, so murdered. How do we work on their cultural aspect where they start to look at this in a different way? And there's something I want to add to this too. And then how do we also, like, our police can't be us versus them. I don't know how they don't do it. I don't know how an officer goes out into a terrible neighborhood every night and watches people in the worst moments of their life, showing their worst judgment or responding to things. I don't know how you expect someone to do that for 25 years and not become jaded. I mean, I become cynical. I'm 50. I'm cynical. It's like these things, they don't
Yeah.
ever stop. So I don't propose to have the answer. I just know that if we start with Brace and intolerance and pointing fingers and saying horrible things to each other, find a different problem to work on, because you're not gonna advance the solution in that paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that one of the things that I learned while researching this book is just I don't think I've ever really thought through how police training functions. And when you really look at, the SWAT team, for instance, their training in terms of how to serve a search warrant or enter a space, it's a really complicated endeavor. You got to somebody going in first, and then the second person has to work up what the first person's doing, and you think about train a lot and still feel like they don't get enough training.
Yeah.
And you think the average patrol cop, and I think we've seen in cases like Breonna Taylor, you've got cops going in to do a task that they, I would guess, have not really trained all that substantially for. I do think there's a lot of conversations to be had about just training. We obviously need to keep talking about race, but I think that in a lot of the shootings we've seen, I think you've seen cops doing things that violate their own department policies or would not be advised by trainers in a classroom if they were working through the scenario. So I think there's a lot really that could be done in that direction.
Yeah, I totally agree that the training problem is one. I don't know if you heard us talk about this on the show, but one of the problems with all of these solutions is that we collectively have to pay a price for that. You have to pay to have more officers injured because people get hurt in training. You have to pay to have more officers because you want track. We all want like this peakier and peakier resume stack where like, oh, well, should have a college degree. Now it like has a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, all these things. Police departments, this just in, they can't hire enough people anyhow before all this stuff happened. Like Oakland PD. Do you think it's easy to recruit in Oakland? Oh my God. So we want to have an even bigger force. We want to have even more training. Who's going to take these jobs? And I'm not even talking about the personal cost potential to go out and do these things. And then the other thing is as a guy that's been in gunfights, when you get in a gunfight, you hope that you don't make a mistake. But sometimes you are literally doing the very best you can, and that involves shooting randomly at things. And I can't imagine cops coming into something. You don't know if you're going to have to hug someone because their baby died or get into a gunfight within 10 minutes of each other. I don't know that you can ever train someone to withstand that for more than maybe 5 to 10 years before you had to get them the heck off the streets, because it's just so damaging. And what does that cost us? These problems aren't as simple as we want them to be. It's frustrating to me because I've been shot at. And when you go to a door to serve a warrant and someone puts a round through the door back at you, for me, and you have a guy in your thing where he's like, I have a circle basically, and it's in combat zones. We're like, if you're within my circle, it's over. Like there's no
Yeah.
conversation. I've escalated already. Like anything in this is the death zone. And so when you have someone, it's like, this is an unsafe house until we know it's clear. I've been in these situations. You go into a house because you know someone's bad in there, something bad starts happening, and then anything that's moving that's adversarial, even if it's not adversarial, it dies until
Yeah.
everybody sounds the all clear, and then you render aid. So that means people who didn't need to get shot. Police shouldn't be in that world any more often than we have to put them there. But that is a reality of these tactical situations. There's no shooting someone in the hand or in the foot or in the arm on purpose. That's not how that works. It's
Mhm.
just anybody who's been in combat would think that was ridiculous.
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting things, one of the SWAT guys talks about when they get people auditioning for the SWAT team, one of the things he tells them is, I don't care how good you shoot, I don't care how fast you run, I want to know if you can see.
Yeah.
And they talk about how really important it is, how just the art of seeing, being able to very quickly process visual information and then make decisions on how to react to that information. And they believe it takes them 2 to 3 years to fully train their eyes so that they can discern, a cell phone from a gun and really getting confident enough in their abilities to wait that extra moment before taking any action. So yeah, I think that a lot of it goes back to training in a lot of ways.
Does get back to that higher level of training. And again, like that little department, in Iowa or whatever, that doesn't have a massive training budget. How do you deal with that part of the problem? And then we also have to look at the big academic picture. There is 200 plus million police patrols, and the odds on getting killed by the police are all of the police fatalities are comparable to lightning strikes or being blasted by a falling tree. So at some point, doesn't make it not tragic, but we have to look at it and go, how do we improve that even further? And what on earth does that cost? Because there is diminishing return. Everything costs more, and then at some point, you're past the point of chaos where, okay, you turned this part of death off, but this other part opened up. And it's just, and then back to the racial side of things where here it's happening.
You mentioned a little bit earlier this idea that, should we put some sort of time limits on the amount of time officers or you didn't say this specifically, but doing certain jobs. And I've thought about that too, because I think I always find it really interesting talking to rookie police officers because I think universally what they'll tell you is, or at least the ones I've talked to, they get into this job because they want to do good and they want to help people. And they have this idea starting out that they are going to be helping innocents. They are going to be riding in to save the day from evil being visited on good people. And when they get, a year in, they come to see that really the true victim is a white whale in policing. What you're often dealing with is a lot of human messiness,
Ugh.
and that it's not very clear who's right and wrong. It's conflict and human drama, and that really gets wearing. And I think they see this day after day, and a lot of people do get jaded. And I think there's some conversation to be had about, how long do we put police officers in certain jobs in certain neighborhoods? Is it really working for us?
Yeah, that jading. I've got a bunch of friends that are police officers, and they'll say, I come up on a guy, I've got my can of Narcan, the thing I use way too often, and I bring this person back to life only to find the same dude in the same spot the next day overdosing again. And they're like, I can't leave them to die, but why am I doing this? Why am I saving this person's life? And so they go through these things where it's a constant reminder that humanity sucks. You know, it's like at our worst, we're just terrible, terrible people.
It's a struggle for a lot of people just to survive every day, and I think that it's the cops that we send in to handle all the problems that we don't see happening so often, and that takes a toll.
One of the things you bring up in the book, and I love the character of the doctor. I mean, I'm thinking of these guys in terms of story and character because he straddles the line. He is black. He loves cops. He's struggling to sort out his experiences versus you have to respect authority. Look at what these people do for us. And it's just such a great pivot point. And then another element you brought in, and then this will turn into a conversational topic, was as a combat guy, I always say people that don't want to get shot act like it.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
As a combat guy, I always say people that don't want to get shot act like it, and if we trained our kids, this is how you don't get shot. And really focused, because as much as the cops need training, we all need training too, in whatever community it is. I will never get shot by a cop. Like if I've got a gun in my car and I say, hey, I've got a gun in my car, I promise I won't get shot. Because I'm a combat guy. I'll take my index and thumb and I'll say, look, I'm going to keep my hands exactly like this. So I can't harm you with these fingers, right? I'm going to keep them like this. I'm not going to move. I'm going to do exactly what you say. Because I want to make sure that you get home safe. And I put it all on them. I want to make sure you get home safe. I see your hand and your pistol. I'm going to slow everything. I become the negotiator for my own life, right? Because if you don't, like there's a video, and again, it's horrible. It's horrible. There's a black man gets stopped by the cops. What we all don't know is what happened the shift before, the call before, the pre-patrol briefing. We don't know what's been said to that cop, what to be on the lookout for. And as a guy that's been on the lookout for things, be on the lookout for a white Hyundai. You're like, what Hyundai? White Honda. Which one is it? Is it 4 doors? Is it 2 doors? Is it a van? Because these questions are in your head. So this guy's in a white van, and the cop's like, I need to see your identification. And the guy thrusts his body towards his van to comply with the cop. and
Hmm.
he gets shot. And I think he got killed. I'm not sure if he survived or not, but he gets shot because he was in a situation where you don't know what the cop is thinking. Again, if you don't want to get shot, you have to act like it. So you take all these things, you straddle these things where you don't know why the cop pulls you over. And if you start with the racial premise, then it will always self-validate. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems with race, but if we start from that point and if we act like someone who is jumpy or fidgety and we're scared,
Mhm.
these things become real problems and they self-validate and they grow like these have grown into a problem that's greater than it ever was. I mean, Breonna Taylor should be alive, but if you're in a house where there's a warrant, like if we didn't have our drug policy that we have, maybe she's still alive. If that kid doesn't dive back into his van to go get to comply with the police so quickly, maybe he doesn't get shot. But that the whole idea, and then in your book, I finally got there, you talk about these parents that say, I taught my kids how to behave around the police. I've taught them that. But could we improve that part of it where we get even better and we approach this thing like all of our lives? I consider my life to be at risk when a cop comes in behind me. I hate it. I don't like getting pulled over by cops. But I go, now I have to make sure this person is calm. I really become the negotiator.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that I was doing the same thing in Louisville. Like whenever I was passing a line of cops, I was making sure I had my press pass and that they could see my hands. I think though when you talk to, I think about stories like this though. I remember when I first started at my first newspaper job. I was in my early 20s, and the paper had a black managing editor. She was a woman, and I remember her saying very offhandedly one day. She did not, if she needed gas on a Saturday, she would not go to the gas station in her sweatpants because she didn't. It was a safety matter. So she would get dressed up. She would do her hair, put on her makeup, and I think that people just get tired of I think as white people we don't really fully grasp sometimes all the little calculations people of color are having to make every day.
Mm.
And I think sometimes if you get pulled over for the 10th time, you're not interested in, you know, not expressing your frustration with the problem,
Yeah.
So I kind of see both sides of that um, equation a bit.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, and again, I get frustrated when I get pulled over. I've been,
Yeah.
especially when I was younger. I'm just like, why? What? For a while, it was as if I was black. I drove a car that apparently was on a BOLO list. It wasn't my car, just a car that looked like my car. My car was my mom's car. It literally had a super mom license plate frame around it. And but it was the car that I got to drive when I was younger, and I would get pulled over all of the time. And it was frustrating because, maybe I'm going somewhere, and now it's 20 minutes while they try to figure out if I was that guy. And thankfully, I never was. But for a good 6 months, I got pulled over all the time, not doing anything wrong at all.
Yeah, that's frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, easy to get mad and be a little quick with the police. What did you
Yeah.
What did you learn from writing this book?
What did I learn? I learned, gosh, I think I learned to more deeply feel how a lot of people who are not like me feel these issues, like in their daily lives. Like, I think I really felt the frustration of the police officers who, they were on the cusp of dying this night and they didn't run, they stood there side by side, determined to take this gunman out. And I think about that sacrifice and commitment. And just the thinking about what it must have felt like up there. Um, I also think about Dr. Williams, who is an incredibly impressive guy in every way. He's a very well educated. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. You think about him not being able to stand outside his apartment without somebody calling the cops on him as a suspicious person. So I think that, I guess what I learned from this is how much people on all sides of this debate really have to say, and very thoughtful things that we should be listening to.
Yeah, the thoughtfulness, right? In terms of
Oh, I lost your sound there.
That's because it's an airplane flying overhead and I hit mute. I'm in my backyard tent studio. Yeah,
Oh, cool.
the thoughtfulness, really, I mean, and that's what I'm trying to default to. I want to understand, and so that means I have to be thoughtful, but it also means I have to ask hard questions too. I mean, these things are tough. Like, we know that whatever problem our policing problem is, it is not the community that gets murdered the most are black men in our country, and it's primarily black men doing it. I'm desperate to try to figure out how to solve that problem. We're putting our by doing my journalistic piece on the prison system, the entire system, the penal system in general. So the prisons, the courts, like, there's not this rash of like, hey, there's no crime, we're going to shut courts. It's always bigger courts, more, more, more. And so what we do is the unions, all of this stuff, they crave young black men, and they chew them up, spit them out, and then we as a community all look down on them for failing to make good decisions or whatever. And it's preposterous, this system that we've built that craves these things. We complain about the industrial complex that supports prisons, right? But we're not saying, hey, put less people in jail. Like, we've created a demand that the government can't meet, and so they have to contract out prisons. So the prison industrial complex is our complex. We demand that. DAs don't run on, I'm soft on crime.
Yeah.
They don't do that.
Sure.
And so we have these conundrums where we have scales that refuse to be balanced.
Mhm. Yeah, I had a conversation with a young woman in Louisville just 2 days ago. And she basically said, I feel scared all the time. I'm scared of my neighborhood because people are shooting at each other. I'm scared of the police, that they might think I'm doing something wrong. And I do think there's a lot of the issues are overwhelming, and multifaceted,
Yeah. All right, let's stop talking about such a hard topic.
Okay.
Let's lighten the mood a little bit. But I mean, look, these conversations have to be kind of hard and uncomfortable, because the answer is not going to be, oh, all you have to do is hug each other. Like, it's never going to be
Right.
that simple. What are you working on now?
So I am a little bit stalled out by schooling my two children who are not back in school yet. So there's lots of cooking and cleaning going on over here. But I think, I'm really interested in, I think a lot of probably one of the most interesting things going on right now is, as we look ahead, is what are we going to do about drugs? I think that a lot of um, these law enforcement practices that people are uncomfortable with, no-knock warrants, stop and frisk, it really goes back to how this country polices and enforces drugs. And I'm really interested to see how that's going to evolve. Dallas has a pretty robust undercover narcotics operation still going. A lot of departments have kind of moved away from that because of the danger. And I don't know, I may be looking for some narcotics detectives to follow around. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm looking for my next story. So if you have any ideas,
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
open.
I've got ideas for days. I mean, basically a spy is a reporter. My job is to go out
Yeah.
and talk to those things. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always wanting to go out and do these kind of things. When you tried to put this story together, there are so many different elements. You had to put things in the cutting room floor because there's no way to put it all in. How did you find that thread and write it so well?
Well, I think that my first attempt at writing it, I really tried to lay out the characters in great detail. I mean, they're people. I keep calling them characters, but they're real human beings. But and it's funny, I got a few opinions on the draft, and everybody was like, "Oh, this is boring. Like, you're laying down two heavy character tracks before you've gotten us interested in any action." So I basically scrapped that and then went back to the drawing board, really with the idea that, we're going to start with this night, and we weren't going to stop with the forward moving action, and everything was going to have to be folded in along the way. And then there's only so many diversions you can take and rabbit holes you can go down. So I was really trying to keep the action moving and also give you a sense of who these people are and some of the bigger issues in policing, getting a little taste of those here and there. But I think Larry Gordon is in a lot of ways the heart of the book. I think structurally, he's there for a large portion of what's happening that night. So he's a nice touchstone to keep going back to. And I think the questions he's wrestling with really go to the heart of the story. So a lot of it, I think, ended up structured around Larry. Yeah.
The mayor was the mayor was an interesting character as well because, like any executive of something huge, President Bush comes to mind, Bush the younger. He's going to be a status quo president. I'm going to keep things going well. And all of a sudden, everything changes and he becomes this wartime president and has to adapt everything. It seems like the Dallas mayor was sort of a guy like that, where he's like, no, we have all this business stuff. I know how to build business. And then all of a sudden, it's like all this social stuff comes flying into his door. And he's like, here's how we're going to do this. And you're sort of, yeah, he's interesting. Talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, so I spent a brief and unhappy period covering politicians, and I do not enjoy that line of work. It's lots of talking, I get bored.
Yeah.
But he's my favorite politician I've ever interviewed, and I really enjoy talking to him because he's a philosophy major. You'll be talking to him and he'll start talking about Camus and Sartre. I can't even pronounce that properly, probably. And he's really a thinker. He is a politician. He's a businessman. But his candor is refreshing in a lot of ways. So he's just a really interesting guy to have a conversation with. So yeah, I really enjoyed that part of the reporting process.
It took me until right now, as looking online to find the story. The kid's name was Dylan Noble in Stockton, and I couldn't even figure out if there was ever charges, but unarmed, traffic stop, dead.
Gotcha.
And so these names that come up, here's a kid that who knows what the heck happened. I don't have time to research it right now, but it took me that long just to find. There are so many people getting shot by the cops. There are so many stories. It gets covered so much by the press, and I guess rightfully so. But it does seem like, and look, you're in the media, I'm in the media. We fixate on certain things and really tell a story. There's an interesting podcast, I think it was Invisibilia, where they gave an emerging reporter a bunch of pieces for a story. And they're like, here's this story. We want you to put it together. Show us what you got. And when she gave them the story, it was 180 degrees different than what they thought it was going to be because of the perception of the reporter. And it changed everything in the story. It was about these incels, these involuntary celibate people that, they looked, and she's like, look at this poor person's life. Of course they're angry. Of course they're struggling. Of course, and the story they thought was going to be told from the girl's point of view towards this guy and everything. And so I think about that quite a bit as we look and we pick these stories as editors. We have to sell. Look, the Washington Post exists because, they sell ads, and they can't pay you unless they can, have their clients come back and say that ad is awesome. It continues to work, So how much are we all at fault in the media for creating something that maybe isn't what we think it is?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I sort of always hate the term the media, even though I say it myself.
Yeah.
Because, the media is such a catch-all for so many things that vary in credibility and quality. But I did, just in Louisville the past couple of days, there's such this dance going on between the protesters and the TV cameras, and you just wonder how much of it is feeding off the other.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of relationship is really happening, because you're standing there covering this event and all you can see is 100 reporters that are in the front of the march, and we don't mention that in our coverage, but it's odd. So yeah, we definitely have a role to play. And I spent a couple days recently watching, I don't usually watch much TV news, but I was watching MSNBC and Fox, flipping back and forth.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh, this is why people hate reporters. It's like, it doesn't feel like news. It's lots of people with opinions and pointed questions, and it doesn't really give you the feel of I mean, it's just hard to listen to for very long, you know? So,
Yeah, yeah, it is. I actually stopped watching a lot of news. For the most part, I don't watch it, and I'll watch the White House press briefing because I want to. The reason why is I want to hear what's actually said.
yeah.
And then I hear, and look, and again, as a spy, as someone who's got a mass comm degree, you're a reporter. When I hear the questions come out of that press briefing,
Mhm.
I'm embarrassed for my peers in this community. Did you lie to the American people, or why did you, like, what are you doing? Can you
Yeah.
not like, why? That's a self-serving question that clearly is not going to get any kind of answer that makes sense. Maybe
Mhm.
there's some kind of super secret strategy, but if you've got one, maybe a question and a follow-up, why
Yeah.
that question? Why do you, I mean, I wouldn't want to sell my integrity that short. What are your thoughts on that? I see you laughing. You must have something good to say.
I've had the same thoughts. I wonder about the Trump press briefings because a lot of the questions seem planted. I kind of got hooked on watching the Cuomo briefings at the beginning of the pandemic. You know, he was sort of just folksy and off script a little, and I thought handled them pretty well. But yeah, I've had that same thought that you just articulated many times.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want to give you an opportunity to ask me any questions that you want to ask since
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool that you get to say like as a spy.
yeah. Yeah.
So I think a lot of us see like, we see that as homeland. And how much of our perception of spy life is real.
I mean, none of it. None of it.
Okay.
You know, that's the bottom line. It's one of the most dangerous jobs because, and we're all akin to like the drug cop and the negotiator. We're all family and how we approach these things, but we all approach it differently. But it's extraordinarily dangerous. I mean, the Taliban called a meeting and they, by name, asked for myself and my partner to come and sit in. We didn't know this, but they were assessing us.
Mm,
And we passed because of how I approached the work. But I approached that work that way because I had 20 plus years of experience and lots of conversations to get to that point. They might have decided to kill the younger me, and
mm,
literally wouldn't be hard because I'm sitting there with I have gear, but it's in the corner. I have
yeah.
a pistol, but I don't put my hands near it ever, if I bring it with me. A lot of times I don't. So
Mm,
it's dangerous, but it's not as frantic in the danger, except for those times when you do it. And so you're making calculated risks. I've sat in a room with my hand on a grenade as my fail safe. Like, I'm gonna pull this thing out. And ultimately it wasn't that I didn't know that going in, but it wasn't a problem. So I was able to put the grenade away and we just
mm,
had a regular meeting. But these things happen all the time for someone who's outside of the wire and good at their job. If you're not good, your peers will recognize it and hopefully you will get sort of insulated and asked to do less. So
mhm.
the homeland stuff, no, not at all like that. There's plenty of danger. It's usually unknown danger. You don't know if today is the day by just whoever drives across this line next, whoever walks in this building next, or we're looking for you. Like this whole story about the Russians putting a bounty on Americans.
Mm,
That's not a story. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just not. Anybody who's a collector, anybody who's special forces, we've all heard it. I've seen the reports. They're looking for a guy named Pete. Well, that's me. I'm the
mhm.
guy they're looking for. And of course there's a bounty on me. They see me as a competitor. And whether the bounty is real or not, there's always a bounty. Can you get an American girl? That's been a tale told 1,000 times. So that danger always exists. So no, it's not like Homeland, but it there is a lot of crazy stuff that happens where you're really left to your wits. And if you almost every single operator I've talked to, special forces SEALs, guys like me, have all said, I have more conversations in combat zones than I've ever fired bullets.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Only one person has ever said, no, that's not how it is. And he was a SEAL and he's a slightly older guy, so maybe his time is different. But
Yeah.
it's those conversations. And if you can marshal the conversation in a way that makes sense, you know, you can hopefully reduce your personal risk, your elements risk, and the community's risk in general.
Mhm.
But not
Yeah.
all of us we don't get training really at all. On the Army side, like you go through some basic training, but you don't know what your style is. No one helps you figure your style out. And so until you go out and do the job, you're sort of left to your own devices. And
Wow.
it's pretty terrifying when I see people with their lack of the foundational requirements to do it, and how well they do it. It's no surprise to me that we struggle to gather good intel.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So when are you going to write a book?
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing it. It's in the process. I've actually got I've got two books at least. There's like a more of a memoir, and then there's like this one particular thing, and it's in the works. The problem is that I have to be able to sell my book to take the time. I can't just take a year and a half and just sit down and write and get it done. So, and then have it be like, I've self-published. Like it has to.
Yeah.
I need a financial proposition that makes sense, and I've not figured that part out yet. So it's in the works though.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be like 20 years later. He finally wrote it.
When you write it, I'm going to come back and interview you about it.
Anytime. Yeah, you always
fun.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it. I just can't thank you enough for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. It's been great.
Yeah, it's great for me too. I loved it. I loved exploring the book. And really, seriously, I put the thing on and I couldn't stop listening to it. I hope that someone options it and makes it into a movie, because the way you tell the story, the way you weave it, it's remarkable. You take a very chaotic and horrible thing and you make it relevant to today, even though it wasn't that long ago. But it's still, like I said, you balance that balance. And anybody who wants to read the book, it's called Standoff. It's on Amazon. There's the show links are up. You can check that out. And in general, just Jamie's on Twitter, so you can tweet at her and ask her questions. But I can't thank you enough for writing this book. It's part of this bigger conversation that we have to have.
That means a lot to me. Thank you so much, Pete. I really appreciate that.